Okay. Thank you. I like that. All righty. Hello, hello. How you guys doing? Good. Feeling a little energy? I hope you guys have been enjoying the couple sessions that we've had so far, just getting the opportunity to kind of hear some of those perspectives, the stories, the tips. Given, again, that I've worked at Glassdoor for a long time, I've heard a lot of really great stories, and I've personally also just been so blown away by how useful it is, and just a lot of ideas I'm also going to take back to Glassdoor. So, sorry, Christian. So anyway, this next speaker that we're going to have is the person who spearheads Glassdoor's economic research. What does that mean? Well, as you may or may not know, Glassdoor, again, has millions of job listings and millions of reviews and salary information for, guess how many? 900,000 companies on Glassdoor. So he's the guy who helps make sense of what's going on with all that information, to see what trends we see, other observations and interesting things like that. And I thought I would give a quick plug, because as I heard what the lovely woman over at Salesforce say, we do this audit of our pay data to see and make sure that we're paying women and men fairly. But hey, I understand it can be kind of a challenge. You may not have the resources to do that. Well, the gentleman who's about to walk up here has solved that problem for you. So if you have or know just one data scientist or one data analyst, send them to glassdoor.com/research. And in there is an algorithm that they can use to study your pay. That's it. Simple, sold, figure out where the gaps are and what may be attributing to them. So a couple extra things, too, is that we are going to be doing a few questions. So open your minds to that and other ideas that you may have for the doctor, who's going to be coming up momentarily. And you can use hashtag BPTW for any questions that you have. And we'll be passing around a couple mics to do questions. So with that, I'd like to welcome on stage Glassdoor Chief Economist, Dr. Andrew Chamberlain.
Fill my cup, put some nigga in it. Take a sip, sign the check. Julio, get the stretch.
Thank you. Hey, everybody. So I'm here today to talk about what a crazy hiring environment we are all in, which I think is something you guys all know a lot about. So I'm always looking for a new anecdote or buzzword to break down the economy, to make it simple for people. And my new fun anecdote for the crazy job market is candidate ghosting. So it's funny to even say that out loud. So if you don't know what ghosting is, turn to the 20-something nearest you and ask them. The last panel mentioned Tinder, which I know nothing about Tinder, but I hear that ghosting is you've been dating someone potentially, you're talking, you get tired of them, and you don't want any more. No need to break up. No need to write them an email. Just ghost. This is becoming a thing in HR, which is hard to believe. The end is near when the recruiting space starts importing concepts from online dating. We're all in trouble. But candidates, it's a sign of the times, right? Candidates have so many opportunities. They can ghost now. And to be fair, employers have been ghosting on candidates for a long time. Candidates apply and never hear anything back. But the tables have really been turned. It's such a strong market that candidates have so many offers, they feel like they can just go away. So, and this slide, I love this picture. This is exactly what it looks like when you get ghosted by your best candidate. You're like, no, start all over again. So basically what I want to do today is, I'm the economist at Glassdoor. I want to make you guys smart about why the job market is so nuts right now. I'm going to show you a bunch of pictures about what's going on with the economy and tell you a story about how we got here, really. Then I'm going to try to give you guys some advice from our research about how to deal with that. So what are some things that the research says that you can do in a tough hiring environment to set yourself apart and use culture as a recruiting tool? Okay, so without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. So I want to start way back at the beginning. So 10 years ago was the last time we had a recession in the United States. So I'm sure there's many people here in this room who do not even have 10 years of work experience, right? So any of your employees who don't have 10 years of work experience. They have never been through a downturn. All they've ever known is a super strong economy with rising jobs. So I want to remind you where we began. So during the Great Recession, the economy shrank by 4%. So that's an enormous contraction. You also had unemployment hitting double digits. So if you remember, today the unemployment rate is down at 4%. This is back when it was 10%. So 1 in 10 people in the workforce didn't have a job. Housing prices, where most people hold their money, plummeted. 25% drop in home prices. Like, imagine what that feels like psychologically. You had your 401k dropping by half, 50% drop in the stock market. And then finally, what's probably closest to what your guys' day-to-day life is like, job openings. Open jobs at companies fell 54%. So that is a massive contraction. So since that time, there's been this like long, slow period of recovery. I feel like it's been so long since we've gotten bad numbers on the job market. Certainly the entire time I've been the chief economist at Glassdoor for almost 5 years now, it's just been good news after good news for job seekers, and I'm getting like more and more stressed out questions from employers about what to do. So I want to show you, like, when we say the economy's good, I'm going to show you a couple pictures about what we mean there. So first is the overall picture of job gains in the economy. So this is a view of the monthly jobs added in the economy since that gray bar, very light gray bar, which is when the recession happened. And that's when job growth really went off a cliff. But since then, month after month, for 100 straight months, employers have added jobs. So when's the last time that happened? That has never before happened. The federal government started collecting these numbers back in the 1930s during the Great Depression, just to figure out what the heck was going on in hiring. And this is the longest streak we've ever gone adding this many jobs. So this really is totally unprecedented in many ways. So that's really important to keep in mind. And if you look very closely at this chart, just like in, if we go back one, if you look really closely, you'll see right at the end here, there's a slight uptick where things are actually getting better, like the economy roared in 2018. It didn't slow down. That's kind of unusual this late in a cycle. And part of the reason is we had like a huge federal tax cut that went into effect that created a lot of jobs in manufacturing and construction. So that's kind of the state of things. This is why things feel so nuts to you. So this is what is fueling all this job growth. These are the number of open jobs on Glassdoor today, going back several years. This is like from our database. I come in every Monday morning, and like this is the first thing I check. I'm always waiting for this to plummet so I can freak out and tell my friends the end is here, but it never happens. It just keeps rising. 6 million open jobs on Glassdoor today, and that has pushed down unemployment rate to an 18-year low. So that is a sign of super robust hiring. Now, if there was one picture in this whole deck that probably best captures the struggle is real, it's this one. Now, what these two lines are is the top line, this yellow, this is the number of unemployed workers in the economy, and this green line is the number of open jobs rising over time. So you see, like way back during the last recession, there was a huge number of unemployed workers for every open job. There were like 6 unemployed people for every 1 job opening. So that's why back, if you guys remember, like in 2010, 2011, 2012, like you're flooded with candidates for open jobs. And today, what's happened is those lines have crossed really for the first time ever in this series. So there's actually today, there's like more open jobs, 6 million open jobs, and there's like 5 million and some change unemployed people. So instead of 6 to 1, there's like less than 1 to 1. And this is why you're having such a hard time finding the super skilled people that you need for your roles. All right. So what that has translated to operationally in recruiting is jobs are sitting open a lot longer. So this shows you going way back to, I guess this is 2010 or so, the average time it takes to fill a job. So this is from when you post on your career site to when you actually make the hire and get them in. So on average, it's 31 days. Of course, this is mixing in everybody together. So this is mixing together like consulting and finance and retail and everyone else. Definitely there's some where it's much longer than this. But this is showing you it's up 82% since 2010. And the reason I think this really matters is like a lot of people, casual observers will look at this and they'll say, well, it's not so bad. Like this is cost savings in a sense, right? Like these roles are sitting open, we're not paying out. But that's totally wrong. Like every day a job sits unfilled is clearly a loss in productivity and output for the company. Like otherwise you wouldn't be hiring these jobs to begin with. So every day a job sits open, your company loses at least the value of the salary that would have been paid, and probably much, much more, because otherwise you wouldn't have hired people for that salary to begin with. So this is the main pain point, is just taking so much longer to fill open jobs. So one of the stories about this recovery that you see in the news is about pay growth being really slow. And that has been true for a long time. So there was such a bad labor market after the Great Recession that wage growth really went off a cliff, along with inflation. Inflation was really low for a while too, and it has been very slow growing ever since. But what I want you to note in this picture is on the far right end, this is what's happening today. So just over the last 6 months, 8 months, that trend is starting to reverse. Pay is starting to rise on average. And this is like clearly the consequence of the super tight labor market. Workers are finally in a stronger bargaining position, and you're seeing more wage growth. So where is the big wage growth happening? So when we look at our numbers on Glassdoor, we see big pay gains in many healthcare jobs. So healthcare just being such a huge jobs generator right now. We're also seeing pay growth, of course, in tech, which is no surprise, but also in some low-skill positions. Things like retail clerks, truck drivers, jobs where employers are just like running out of people to hire. So not necessarily high-skilled jobs, but jobs where there just aren't enough bodies in a local area to hire. So this is part of the landscape. It's not just hard to hire people, but when they come on board, you're paying a premium for them. So who are the jobs engines today that are really creating the most growth in the job market right now? Well, here's a few examples on the left of industries that are really growing strongly today, and then some examples on the right of the industries that are definitely not growing. So the highlight of this is the very top sector for jobs added is professional business services, which includes many tech roles and many of what you'll call knowledge worker jobs. So they've added like more than 500,000 over the last year. The reason I think that's really important to understand is it helps you understand the value proposition of something like Glassdoor, because in that environment where you're hiring these knowledge workers, those people are the most important asset of the business. So your most important asset is not necessarily your technology or your patents or your plant and equipment. The most important asset is the people. And this is, because of this environment, like this is why it's so critical to put your best foot forward and pay attention to the employer brand during this environment. These people have options, and they're definitely doing their homework before they come and apply to your jobs. Other sectors that have been doing quite well is actually manufacturing and construction. Surprises many people, but this is partly the result of big tax changes that happened in the past year. The sectors that really aren't doing so well today is traditional retail and media, which is no surprise there. In retail, what's kind of interesting is when I say traditional retail, I mean like the kind of retail where you can buy it on Amazon really easily instead of going to the store. That retail is really having trouble today. The kind of retail that is still thriving is the more experience-based retail, like where you go and there's like experts there in the retail store and they can help you navigate a complicated product space, and it's like a pleasant environment, there's good lights. Like that's the kind of retail that's surviving, like a Kiehl's store or a Sephora. The ones that are really suffering are just like a commodity buying experience. They're just getting pummeled by online sales. So this is my last slide about the state of the job market, and I was kind of hoping I could say that like this is going to end soon, and it's all going to be better, and like soon there'll be abundant workers, and it'll be so easy to hire. Because I get asked that question all the time. People are like, when is this craziness going to end? Like it's been 9 years. And unfortunately, my bad news is that because of demographics in this country, tight labor markets are probably here to stay for decades, even if the economy goes into a recession. And here's the reason why. So this chart is the growth in the labor force. So this is how fast like the number of workers in the United States is growing. Now, back in the 1970s, which is the far left of this, like when I was a kid, the labor force was growing at like 2.5% a year. So that means like all the companies that are doing hiring, like the pool of people coming in that are available to take jobs is growing really fast. In the next 10 years, 2020 and beyond, it's growing at 0.5%. So 1/5 of that rate. So why? Retiring baby boomers, like leaving the labor force and going on vacation in Key West, and birth rates are really low. People are just not having the kids they used to. So the US birth rate The rate of like average children per woman is like at its historic low ever today. And the combination of those two factors means there just aren't as many people. Immigration is also slowing, so there isn't that to fill in the gap. So what this means is that workers are going to remain scarce. It's probably not going to disappear anytime soon. There's going to be struggles for talent. And I have some advice about like what I think employers really should do to get ready for this. And partly it's a story about getting ready to use more automation to make each worker do more. So like automation, instead of destroying a bunch of jobs, like probably like we team each worker up with automation to make them do the work of 3 people, right, and pay them more. And then secondly, companies need to get better at like onboarding and training, like getting workers ready to work alongside AI and automation. Like I don't feel like many companies today are really like, they don't really have a plan in place at all for like how to train people. Like what is AI anyway? And like what are the tools, the AI tools that are being sold today that might help you actually do more work as one person? And how should we train you and get you ready to go? I feel like most people are just, they think AI means we're going to lay off half of our workforce and that's all that's going to happen. But that's definitely not what's going to happen. It's probably because of this fact right here, this demographic change, AI is probably not going to displace many people. It's actually just going to change their jobs. Okay, so that is the state of the labor market. And now what I'd like to do is I want to try to give you a plan for like what I think you can do about this. So instead of just suffering through and being reactive. So we do a lot of research at Glassdoor. I run the think tank there. I'm constantly doing data science work with all our reviews and our salaries and interview reviews and other things. And the research doesn't give all the answers, but it gives very specific, like quantitative answers to very specific questions. So by gathering together a bunch of studies we've done over the years, I got a couple pieces of advice I think I can give of ways to use culture and your brand image on Glassdoor as an advantage in a really tough hiring market. Okay, so let's have a look at that. So the first thing I want to do is I want to just give you like a big picture reality check in the era of Amazon's HQ2 and how that has played out. So when Amazon started its HQ2 search, I think there was a lot of optimism that maybe they would end up in a smaller, scrappier city, maybe somewhere that didn't have tech jobs now, and that would be like the thing that would be like great for that city because it would like maybe take it on a different path and help create a new tech hub in the United States. And when the announcement finally came, I think many people felt like it was anticlimactic. Like, oh, come on, like of course you're going to go to DC and New York and like that's where the talent already is. Like no kidding. And I'm like, well, yeah, that's exactly why they went there, right? So when we've looked at the research about whether you can get skilled people to move for jobs, it turns out they almost never move for jobs. So it varies a lot, like some are more likely to move than others. But we actually, in a piece of research, we looked at the metro location of people on Glassdoor on the platform, and then the metro location of the jobs they're really applying to. So not what they're telling people in surveys when they get asked, will you move or not, but like what they're really doing in the job search. And we found like the vast majority of people stay in the same metro area. Like they have families there, they have houses there, they hardly ever go. So when you're thinking about where to expand, like you have to pay attention to this, like where the talent are located. You definitely cannot assume that most of your people are going to relocate. It's not true. And also, wherever your company chooses to locate, so Amazon choosing to expand in DC, and although it won't happen in New York anymore, wherever else they end up, the people in the culture and the skills in the local job market, wherever they expand, that's like the DNA, that's like your future DNA of your company. Because a huge number of your job applications are just going to come from people in that area who are ready to take those jobs. So that's one general piece of advice I want to give. So next, I want to talk about 3 stages of the candidate journey, and I want to try to give you advice on all 3 of them. What the research says you can do with culture, okay? So the first stage is how to attract people to your jobs. So I'm going to tell you what the research says about that. Second, how to interview them once you have attracted them. And then third, once you get them on board, how to retain them. So we've done research on all of these areas and many others. So I'm going to share a couple thoughts with you on that. Okay, so first, how do you attract job seekers with culture? So the first thing I want to get on the same page about is at Glassdoor, we often talk about showing strong culture to candidates. So when you take the outside perspective and you go on Glassdoor and you look at how your company looks compared to other companies, what are candidates really looking at? And there's really 4 things. So first is a motivating mission. Now, this is so easy to change, but I see many employers do this very badly. It basically is like you have to connect your business to a larger social mission. You've got to be more than just a company, more than just a product. That is essential for showing strong culture to candidates. The second thing is that you want to show some kind of transparency. So people don't want to feel like your company is a black box. When they look at reviews, they want to see you interacting with people who are saying things about the company. They want to see you sharing something from the inside, videos and other things. That's quite important. Third, shared values. So they want to feel like when I come into the company, I'm joining onto this partnership, this team, there's a structure in place where we can all work together. And like that shared values is really what will differentiate you from other competing companies. It's just like the way you talk about your mission as a group and what things you all believe in at the company. And then finally, that you're people focused. That you actually, so you don't just talk about your technology, you talk about your people. You talk about like what it's like on a daily basis working there, not just like be part of this amazing tech platform or whatever it is. So those are really like 4 things you should keep in the back of your mind as you're looking over your profile and trying to get yourself in shape to attract people. The second lesson I want to give about attracting candidates is you really need to control your narrative. Now, I know it's not possible to totally control, but the conversation about your company is all happening whether you like it or not. There's no putting that back in the bottle. And the choice you have to make is, do we just remain quiet in the face of criticism, or do we take a stance and give our voice back? And like the research is really clear on this, that candidates, even if they see a negative content about an employer, if they see the employer acknowledging that feedback has come in and giving their perspective, dramatically changes the viewpoint of job seekers. Like it can turn a negative into a positive just by showing that like we're not perfect, like we got some feedback and like here's our perspective on it and here's what we're doing. So that's so 89% of job seekers say they value the employer perspective. And this is like the case with all sorts of online reviews and commentary. I think it's a very general point. If you see positive or negative reviews and they don't have any interaction at all from the employer, people are like, well, what's the employer doing? Are they even paying attention to what's happening? So it's a simple thing you can do. And then finally, for attracting people, I just want to show you a piece of research about like, do reviews matter or not for real things you care about? So this is a piece of research that was done by some outside academics, and they, in an experimental setting, like they showed people positive, neutral, and negative Glassdoor reviews, like real reviews from the site, and then they asked them questions about like what pay would you require to take a job at this company, which is super interesting. But what this is how likely are you to submit a resume to the company? And as you can see, like on the left, like people who saw positive reviews were like almost twice as likely to say they would want to submit a resume to the people on the right who saw a negative review. So combining this with the point I just made about the employer voice, like you can help move yourself from the right to the left of this chart by giving your feedback to when you see negative reviews online. Like you can help switch that perspective. So I think that's a very important message. This does really affect metrics that you're paying attention to. Okay, so that was the how to attract people. Next, let's talk about the hiring process. So first thing is a very consistent finding in the research is that culture has a much bigger impact on all sorts of things with job seekers. Attraction, and retention, much bigger than pay. So it's especially among small and medium-sized businesses, a very common misperception when we talk about culture is they say, well, yeah, like our culture isn't great because we can't afford free meals and ping pong tables and so forth. And like the message we often give people is like, that is not really what drives culture anyway, and you don't need to spend a lot of money to get it, and you don't need to pay people more necessarily. So what we found in this one piece of research, we found having a 1-star higher Glassdoor rating had about the effect of 6 times the effect of a $10,000 higher comp. So that just gives you a sense of perspective. Like this is how culture relates to like the business of like managing payroll and running the company profitably. Is your culture definitely is like being traded off against things like pay. And then another tip I want to give is even in a tight labor market, it's important to not go too easy on job candidates. So in our research, we've looked at the relationship between the difficulty of a job interview and how satisfied workers are later on. Okay, so think about your own experience, a few interviews you've been on. We've all been on like super easy interviews. It was just like a handshake and a conversation. And then we've been on like the worst possible interview. It was like tons of skills tests and presentations and so on. So what this is showing you is like, as you go to the right, the job interview is getting more and more difficult. And the height of this is like how satisfied people are from that interview later on when they took the job. So we were able to track the same people who left an interview review and then later on got the job and left a Glassdoor review. So we could connect the two. So basically the finding is a very common mistake employers make is like going too easy on candidates, like not simulating the job and not asking them the questions that will best screen them. Just because it's, we don't want to cause conflict. I think it's the natural reaction for interviewers to just like be friends with people and say, tell me about your history. But our research shows that that isn't what screens people the best. Like you really need to make them do something that looks like the job. So even in a tight labor market, I think it's a mistake to go too easy on people. Don't be afraid that you're going to chase them off. Like people will ultimately be grateful that they went through a strong interview process to make sure that they're the right fit. And then a last thing I'll say about hiring people is informed candidates clearly, like in the research, they are more satisfied later on. Like people who've done their homework beforehand, they're more satisfied later on when they join on the company. So this is from a survey we did where we identified people who had used Glassdoor for the job search beforehand and then those who didn't. And then we asked them how satisfied they were in their jobs and a bunch of other questions later. And what we found is the people who did their homework on Glassdoor, 10% higher satisfaction, all else equal, than those who didn't. So this probably shouldn't surprise any of you if any of you guys have hired people from Glassdoor versus other platforms. Like it just makes sense that people who have, actually like looked at the work-life balance versus innovation versus competitiveness versus other features of a company, they know what they're getting into and they're happier later on. Okay, so the last thing I want to give you some advice about is retention. So we've done a lot of research on retention, which I think is a really cool topic. It's very hard to study. It's hard to follow people through their career paths. We've been able to tackle it with resumes because we can see people's whole careers and all the jumps they've made, and we've gotten a few insights from that. So when we talk about culture and satisfaction on the job, if you ask people, like, what do employees really care about? You get all sorts of opinions. What I'm showing you here is from the data on Glassdoor. Okay, so this is my opinion about what matters. So these are like the strength of each of these factors for predicting overall satisfaction at work. Okay? So the ones at the top, the biggest predictors of satisfaction at your job, so they are not pay, they are not work-life balance, and they are not really the business outlook of the company. Not to say that those things don't matter, but they're small compared to the other factors. The ones that really drive satisfaction in the research, this is a very consistent finding across many studies, is culture and values of the organization. So in other words, when the CEO gets up and talks, do they just talk about financial results and the technology, or do they talk about the mission, like how the company is part of a bigger social project? That's what people mean by mission and values. So that is the biggest factor. Second is senior leadership. Like people want to feel confident that those at the helm are great leaders that they stand behind. And then finally, career opportunities. Nobody wants to be at a dead-end job. So those are the three factors that really matter for satisfaction. And when it comes to retention, what we found is that satisfaction and culture really matter a lot. So we looked in this study at resumes, people jumping job to job. Sometimes when people move, like they stay inside the same company, right, and like take a new job title. So you get elevated up from, a senior account executive to a senior account executive to a sales manager and so on, and you stay in the same company. Sometimes you jump and you move to a competing company. So we were able to study like what factors predict whether people will jump or stay and thrive. And one of the big findings from that research is that when people go and leave, they almost always go to competitors that have a better culture on some dimension on Glassdoor. Almost always. People hardly ever leave just for the money. They're usually looking for a better overall total rewards, which includes the culture of the place. So in this case, we found that having like a 1-star higher rating on Glassdoor was associated with like 4% higher retention. So that might sound kind of small, 4%. Like with a big organization, that is a huge impact. Like if there's anything else you could do at your company that raised retention 4%, you would do it now. This was interesting. This let us like take into account like this is after we accounted for salary differences and like things about the workers and all of these other statistical things. So that's a piece of advice for like in a tight labor market, like you can do things to boost retention so you don't have to go out and fight for the talent elsewhere. So those are some tips that I have for you about like ways you can take the research, use culture as a strategic advantage for hiring in this environment. But at the end of the day, like for your company to make investments in culture and to use it as a tool like I'm saying you should, you have to make the case to senior leaders, right? The CEO has to sign off on this. And so I never want to get up and talk about why you should invest in culture unless I give you something to take back to show them about the business case for investing in culture. So we have done a ton of research over the last 5 years about the financial performance and culture at Glassdoor. So study after study has shown this clear link. The things that your employees are surfacing in Glassdoor reviews are real information about operations, either good things or bad things. And those things about operations have an impact on your consumers because your consumers are interacting with frontline people at the business. And they also have an impact just on operational efficiency at the company. So in this particular study, this was a group of outside academics that looked at quarter-to-quarter changes in Glassdoor reviews and looked at how they predicted financial performance in the following quarter. And this is one of the best pieces of research that's ever been done with our data. It was just so totally convincing that like they found that clearly there is a link. So like upswings and downswings in Glassdoor reviews, they often precede surprise low or high earnings in following quarters. So that means like what is happening in reviews and sentiment is clearly like, it's really capturing a real thing that's going on at the business. And what they found is that the opinions of like current employees and employees that were closest to the home office, so the ones who were like closest to the C-suite leadership, had the most predictive power. So even though those people aren't disclosing like trade secrets or like saying anything that's beyond our rules on Glassdoor, their sentiment about like, oh, like, you know, we're disorganized or we're super innovative, like the things that people say and the language they use definitely is related to your financial performance. So when you go and talk to your senior leadership and they're like, you're trying to figure out like, why should we invest in this? This is just an HR thing. This is a recruiting problem. This is your problem to deal with. The message back to them is no, this is actually like a problem. Like this is the way you manage the entire business. Look, we have this special insight into the performance of the company and it makes sense to invest in this. This is not just about people and hiring. All right? So that pretty much is the message I wanted to give you today. So we talked about 4 big areas here where you can keep culture in mind and survive in today's very rough job market. So we talked about how to attract people with culture, how to put your best foot forward, show strong culture. And then second, once you find those people, how to hire them, how to make sure that you screen them carefully, and what factors are really going to make the difference to them when they choose to accept or reject an offer. Next, we talked about satisfying people, like what really makes people happy on their jobs or not. And finally, how to retain people at the end of the day. So I'm hopeful that you guys can take some of these messages and maybe have a little bit of an easier time in a really rough ocean of a job market today. So thank you very much, and I'm happy to take any questions you have. Thank you very much.
As well. And I'm actually just curious, if you guys remember, I asked you to do an exercise at the beginning of this session listing what attributes make a best place to work for yourselves as individuals. And then I also asked you to think about what attributes you would use to describe what makes your companies a best place to work. And so I kept thinking about that one slide that you had up there about these 5 attributes.
How many people got those 3 right?
Yeah, and then of course like the salary one where you're like, okay, like, you know, senior leadership's more important than salary. But it's interesting, right? And so I'm actually kind of curious, if you take those lists that you created for yourself as an individual and also for your companies, how do those pair up? So
I think the ones that people most often get right are the career opportunities and culture and values.
Yeah.
I think many people are surprised by the senior leadership part.
Yeah.
But you know, like no one can really have a great culture at an organization unless they have career paths for people, right? Yeah. And culture and values is like a no-brainer. Like people need to feel like they're part of a bigger social mission, not just another company. So.
Cool. All right, I'll get started. Do we have any live questions? Okay. So let's get started. So here's one that I thought was actually kind of interesting. Is you talk about like this pressure, right? That's felt about like the job market. How can we close jobs quicker in this competitive environment? What's holding back the close?
Wow. So from the perspective of getting
your candidate in the door, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the thing is today, like we've done some research on how long the interview process takes at companies, and we found it's gotten much longer. Like companies today are making candidates go through more hoops than they did 10 or 15 years ago. Part of the reason is because of like the digital transformation, right? There's like a lot of traditional industries that are having to hire data scientists and software developers, like in manufacturing and retail and consulting. Like how do you, like people don't have experience in hiring these skilled people, so they're throwing hoops at them to try to screen them. So that's like dragging out the process. So that's one thing is like, that's an inevitable fact that if you want to be more careful with screening, it's definitely going to take longer. What I would say is that there's kind of there's a balancing act you have to make. Like you don't necessarily want all your jobs to close fast. Like when you look at the industries where jobs close very fast, it's very often like food service and retail, it'll be like 7 days. And like, not that there's anything wrong with those sectors, but like that's not really like gonna work for aerospace engineering or like tech. You're gonna have to take more time because you need to just, you need more time to like validate people's skills and get to know them better, make sure they're the right fit. So I'm not sure there's any magic silver bullet, but what I will say is like, don't add screens just because it's easy to add screens. Like, do you really need a group panel interview? Like, do you really need another presentation? Every one of those things adds days to the process, and you risk that person jumping because people are always interviewing multiple places at the same time. So.
Good point.
Yeah.
Great. Okay, I'm just gonna keep going. Let's see. Okay, recession. You talked about it.
There has to be a recession question.
There has to be a recession question. Like
every time.
I mean, you talked.
Not coming.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you told us all that we need to have a lot more babies to solve the talent
that's
shortage.
That's my most important lesson today.
Great, done. But what, like really though, like what are the signs that we should be looking for?
Yes, okay, so there hasn't been a recession for almost 10 years. Everybody's wondering when it will come. No one knows. It's impossible to predict them. Very often we're in a recession already before we know. We won't know until 6 months have gone by. So the place you'll see it first will be like in open jobs. Like it'll be like basically company earnings will miss the mark. And then they'll make a phone call to the HR group and they'll say, maybe put those heads on hold and don't. So you'll see that in open job levels like very quickly before there's any layoffs or anything like that. There's one wonky thing economists watch called the yield curve, which is like, go Google it. I'm not even going to try to explain it right now, but it's basically a curve that should always be going up. And when it flattens out and declines, it's definitely bad news. And right now, the yield curve is very flat. It's not upside down yet, but it's like, so I participate in these surveys of economists, like when's the next recession coming? Everybody always says like about a year and a half from now, or like always, like no matter what. So a year and a half from now, it's my
All right, the last one that I have is, I think you probably hear this a lot too, is I think people often feel that this like culture thing, whether they're like more heavily invested, spent several years working on it, or kind of just starting, like it's a challenge, it's a work in progress. But how do you suggest, like what kind of quick tips, if you will, would you offer to people of like building culture?
Yeah, well, my dream job in some ways, like someday in the future,
is this one, Andrew.
It's like to pop into some company that has never done any employer branding, is like never paid any attention to what's going on in online reviews or anything, and just like tell me like what are the low-hanging fruit in the first 12 months we're going to do, like this, and the other thing, and we have no budget. So I think understanding the factors that I put up on the screen about what are the big factors really helps you understand your playbook, right? So of the 3 top ones, the culture and values and career opportunities for people, those are 2 factors you can change without spending a lot of money out of pocket. It's for career opportunities, it's like, setting up career paths for people, like, even if you can't offer to pay them a ton more, but like just when you hire everybody, like have them moving on a path. That's just like an institutional change you can make. And then second, culture and values. It's like get your CEO to stop talking about the financials and start talking about like the emotional connection that makes people want to come to work even if they weren't being paid. So those are 2 super easy things. The other thing obviously is like the feedback component that I mentioned is like don't let either praise or criticism stand without a response ever. Like people in the PR world, like when a negative story or even a positive story comes out, like you always are there with your other message. You're always there with like balancing it out with another point of view. And like that's what you should always be doing that. You should never let, you should control your own conversation. So those are things that are like super easy to do. They don't cost any money. The things that do cost money, I mean, getting great senior leaders in the door, they're not cheap. And I don't really know if anybody has the perfect recipe for doing that. But that's where to start.
Great. All right. Oh, great. We've got a question. If I could get a mic, please.
Hey.
Okay, so I have a question. So I work for a smaller tech company. So when we're interviewing people, the process can take a little longer just because we are on the smaller side. So it does take a little bit longer to schedule the interviews and making sure that we're having the right people in those interviews. Our biggest challenge that I've been finding is a lot of the students, they want the big names. They want the Amazon, the Google, and I find like we have a great work culture, but I feel like because we aren't that big name, it's kind of holding us back a little bit.
Yeah.
And it's hard for me to kind of show them this is our culture without having them literally come in and sit with our engineers and say, this is our culture. We do a lot of things, and just by posting it on places, because we are, smaller, it's harder. We don't have that reach that some companies do. So do you have any tips of, how we kind of go against these bigger companies?
Yeah, I mean, you obviously won't have a budget for like movie level production videos and that sort of thing. But, like you still can, there's all the basic tools like in the standard like employer profile on Glassdoor. You can still do the photos and you can, talk about us. I think the main pitch for smaller businesses to young people is that you get more responsibility right now. Like you're not going to be making photocopies. Like you're on the spot and like you have to really run the business. Like I'm somebody who's always worked at small companies and like that's been the main reason is like I like to build things and I don't like to be told what to do. And like if you go to work at a big company, like you're going to be in line. So that's one really important thing. The research though about time to hire typically shows larger companies often take much longer than you think for hiring. And small companies tend to move a lot faster, believe it or not. So even though on the inside it feels like you guys might be moving slow, I bet you guys are probably competitive to the bigger places just because it's just there's so much more bureaucracy, even at big tech companies. They're just like any other big company. So I mean, that's like, I think if that's the pitch you want to make, you should be explicit about it and be like, you need to come here because like you're going to be part of a big growth process and you can invent what the company is. Don't go work on somebody else's project that's already done. That's my best advice for you.
There is also, so Andrew's team put out a study actually last week, which we called the Gen Z study. Shocker, not everybody's a millennial anymore.
That's right.
There's
Millennials are old news now.
They're old news. They
30s.
are the workforce.
It's over. Now it's all about Gen Z.
Yeah, but it was really interesting, right? Because one of the big takeaways was what are the things that millennials are looking for and then comparing that to Gen Z. And so think about some of those attributes
Yeah.
too. This is kind of like more of the learning-based idea, but it was just really interesting to kind of see again some of those sharper points. And that mission, passion, connection to the business, that's going to win too.
Yeah. Great. Well, thank you all very much. Great to be here.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.